Welcome to the OTA podcast where we discuss everything performance training. I'm Coach Chris Barnard. Let's get into it. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the OTA podcast. I'm Coach Chris Barnard, and for today's video, it just so happens that we happen to be releasing one of our best-selling programs. I redid it, called Athletic Calisthenics, and with that, I obviously dove into the books, did some research, and wanted to refine the way that we train body weight with athletes. This was a program that I actually created back in 2012, 2013. Didn't expect this to be a hit, and it was a necessity in my training in remote. As I was working with some remote athletes, I started to run up against the fact that a lot of these athletes either didn't have weights, they had limited equipment, or their parents wouldn't allow them to weight train, or they were going on vacation. So what I had to be able to find was the best body weight methods to continue to develop athletes to get faster, more agile, more powerful, right? Just overall more explosive and strong for their sport while only being able to use no equipment. So what that led me down was just being able to create athletic calisthenics. And from there it took off. It's been about 10 plus years. And so I wanted to refine that, and I wanted to back it by some of the best strategies. And I just figured I'd make this and be able to share some of those new insights with you. Now, as far as developing speed, agility, and power goes, nothing essentially changes from a programming perspective in my eyes. You see, we're going to continue to train from the most foundational, least complex movements, your low-level plyometrics, your low-level sprints, starts, build-ups, your 90-degree cuts, your 180 cuts, your 360, all those things that are going to really continue to support an athlete in their speed, agility, power. And we're going to continue to essentially progress those to more complex movements, right? And we go from the most isolated foundational movements and elevate those, and then continue to integrate them into, larger components of movements. And that's how we essentially progress those. And, if you've ever seen any of our programs, you know that we take you through a very foundational, and it's very similar to how one might strength train. However, the secret sauce as far as body weight training for athletes is really what it comes down to is how do we achieve that same stimulus and stress with resistance training, essentially with body weight, right? And, how do we mimic a barbell or a dumbbell and putting the body under actual load? Now, the truth be told, you're never going to achieve the same amount of absolute strength, right? The total amount of resistance you can overcome, because you're not going to be able to mimic with the body weight a 500-pound barbell. However, you have to remember as an athlete that relative force does play a larger role in transitioning to an athlete than actual absolute strength. Whereas absolute strength is the total amount of force you can overcome. Relative force is relative to your actual body. So, you could take a very strong athlete. There's many examples out there with powerlifters who are just absolutely strong, but relative to their own body weight, they actually probably can't produce that much vertical force, right? They can't get off the ground and overcome gravity. So you just have to understand that we just have to tweak and use different modalities to be able to overall enhance that. Now, with that being said, there's a select amount of ones, and I'll make an accompany visual YouTube video that you guys can watch some of these strategies that give you a little bit better depiction. But let's go ahead and go through them. So number one is going to be, how do we progressively overload an athlete with body weight? And what I started kind of thinking about was ways that you can essentially week by week gamify. Whereas with majority of the time with our athletes, we progressively overload by increasing intensity or maybe even volume. Well, with body weight, you're essentially only constricted by the amount of volume because the body weight variable does not change. The weight stays the same essentially, where the load doesn't. So what we need to be able to do is essentially gamify it and use time in our best interest to be able to essentially continue to progressively overload, especially in the beginning phases of body weight training. So the first one that I really absolutely love to use in phase one is going to be escalated density training. So EDT training is essentially a style of training created, I guess you could say, by a coach named Charles Staley. Charles Staley essentially wanted to be able to maximize the amount of work he did with his clients in the least amount of time. So he really wanted simplified training, and he really wanted just total work. He wanted to skyrocket, but do it in minimal time. And so what he did was he found opposing movements, and he would put a set time, and he would do it for 15 minutes, and he would choose an agonist antagonist. Think of like a push-up and a inverted row. And essentially what that he would do is he would have his client go back and forth for a set amount of reps with that particular movement, and go back and forth and get as many total repetitions or total work that they can within 15 minutes. What that was allowing them to do is not essentially pre-fatigue the system, and with those agonists and antagonists, he was able to play off those and create more total work. So they were able to get more push-ups, more pull-ups, and when they would fatigue, essentially what they were able to do was knock down the total amount of repetitions. So let's say they started off with 10 reps of each one. Let's say 5 minutes in, they get a little fatigued. They knock down to, let's say, 5 repetitions for each one. And then by the end of it, let's say at the 13th, 14th minute, they're doing singles. But the goal is to basically transition back and forth, rest when you need to, go when you can, and be able to squeeze in the most amount of work of those two movements within that 15-minute span. I found this to be very beneficial for athletes, especially at the initial phase, because we can really build up their work capacity, right? Like as I was saying, their total amount of work. The other thing is we're able to increase their neural efficiency with those movements. So with them performing all that volume with that, they're actually getting better at those particular movements, right? But it's not in a fashion that's going to really fatigue them and break form and technique. So we can really get the most amount. The other thing that I really like is I like EDT for stimulating hypertrophy. So if we need a little bit more volume to be able to really kind of get those muscles to grow and get better at that movement, increase cross-sectional area, we're able to use that method, that modality within those movements to really increase them. What's up, coaches? Real quickly, let me go ahead and introduce you to Performance Coach U certification. Now, this is the certification / course that I put together for coaches who want to train athletes and not only get results, but also maximize profits in the private sector. The problem that I saw with a lot of these courses and certifications out there for coaches was that they provided a lot of information and not a lot of application. So I wanted to pull back the covers over 10+ years of experience and show you the ins and outs of actually being in the trenches so that you get maximum results while also scaling your business. So if you're interested in this, go ahead and check out the link down below and you can get more information. From there, what I like to progress to in phase 2 is some basic principles. And again, this is using time, right, to be able to progressively overload. So what I mean by that is you can have time sets. So let's say we were doing pull-ups, and let's say there's 2 minutes on the clock. You perform as many repetitions as you can in 2 minutes. So let's say you bang off 5-10 reps, drop down, shake it off, jump back on. The clock is still ticking, and you still have to get as many reps as you can. And the goal is for each week is essentially to be able to get squeeze more reps in those 2 minutes. And usually what you'll see is as the athlete gets better and better and stronger, they're going to be able to get more repetitions. The other one that we like is the max sets, right? So it's just max repetitions for a set amount of sets. So let's say we were using pull-ups and we said 2-3 sets of max repetitions. So they're going to hit as many as they can without dropping down or pausing. And what we're trying to do, again, is add those up, gamify it, and beat our previous number each week. Finally, and not last but not least, is our circuits, right? And just basically being able to, again, build total work capacity, have a balance with our actual movements, and be able to balance them across a weekly training meso-micro cycle, if you will, and essentially be able to get, again, a total amount of work and balance out the movements that we're performing by utilizing circuit training. Now, with these circuits, you're still utilizing time. For instance, what I like to do is anywhere from like 3 to 5 rounds of, let's say, 3 to 5 movements. And they're trying to achieve that in the least amount of time. So let's take 3 movements. Let's take like a walking lunge of 10 reps each leg. Let's take a push-up of 10 reps. And then let's take like a basic, flexion, like a sit-up. And each one is 10 reps. Now, let's say there's 5 rounds of those. Now, let's say I say to an athlete, go ahead and perform them as fast as you can hit those 5 rounds and complete the 5 rounds as fast as you can. And let's say they do it within 7 minutes. Our goal next week is to try to hit, 30 seconds less, 6 minutes, 6 minutes and 30 seconds. In all, what we're trying to do is improve each week. Again, we're trying to gamify it using time to be able to overall continue to beat our score from the previous week. And then finally is how we're going to really start to use some modalities to kind of achieve that stimulus we were talking about with the athletes. So I like to use complex training, where essentially we're performing a resisted motion and then transferring that over to more dynamic. All right. So typically what we like to perform as an example is like a heavy back squat followed by like a box jump. Right, where we're using the same, posterior chain muscles to be able to perform that hip extension movement. One, we're overcoming obviously external forces such as the barbell and the weights, and then we're transferring that over to a jump where we're overcoming gravity. One's loaded, one's unloaded, and the goal is to get an acute response for that second movement to have a more enhanced jump. Now, how do we do that with body weight? So we have to use essentially things such as isometrics and tempo, like eccentrics. So the first phase I really like to go through is the isometrics. And this is where we're going to have the athlete hold a specific joint angle for a specific allotted amount of time. Now, usually in these movements, the behind the scenes is they're not just overcoming gravity in that, you're actually pulling yourself into those positions. So for instance, what I mean, if you're performing that push-up, you're actually screwing your hands into the ground and holding it at that specific joint angle. Usually what that joint angle is going to be at its longest range, because we really want to strengthen through that longest range. Now, the reason why I love isometrics is because there's been a ton of research that has shown isometrics are king when establishing muscle activation, muscle unit recruitment. It's also great at being able to enhance rate coding, the amount at which, or the rate at which those motor units turn on, that we can call upon that muscle. It's also been shown to be the king as far as increasing tendon stiffness. So these are all things that I love, that again, we're being able to really fire up that nervous system and then essentially transfer it over to a more dynamic movement. So let's say we hold that iso push-up hold, and then we're going to transfer that over to, like, say, a plyo push-up or a clapping push-up. In the response that we can essentially get a better response in that dynamic acutely. The other one that I like to do is using a tempo. And it's usually slowing down the eccentric, maybe some kind of an isometric, and then maybe slowing down the concentric a little bit. And overall total muscle activation is going to increase. And again, just like we did before, let's say we're performing a split squat or a Bulgarian, slow, controlled, eccentric, 3 to 5 seconds, pause at the bottom, deep range, come back up concentrically, 3 to 5 seconds, shake it off, allow a little recovery, and then they're going to perform a Bulgarian split squat jump. So that's how we're able to really kind of pair those together and be able to overall continue to increase that athlete's relative force. So again, it starts off as volume, and as you can see, the complexity gets greater so that we can really start to work through those mechanisms in the muscle to be able to work specific modalities for that athlete to then again be able to translate over to the field and court. Because if you just do your 10 push-ups, your 10 pull-ups, your 10 sit-ups, and continue to increase volume, you will get better. You will increase your relative force, but you will have a ceiling over your head. So how do we break through that and continue to rise that ceiling when it comes to just using our body weight? So there you have it. Just wanted to kind of go over some of the basic modalities and parameters. If you're interested in that full program, go ahead and check out down below. It's called Athletic Calisthenics. It's been one of our groundbreaking programs, if you will. It's been one of those that we've gotten a lot of great feedback on from our athletes, and not just our athletes, but also the a lot of Gen Pop and former athletes follow it and get into great shape. So there you have it. Just want to kind of touch on that and dive a little bit deeper into body weight training parameters for athletes. So I hope that helps, and I'll see you guys next time.